The great ring of Concord Station turned slowly around its own light, a wheel of metal and glass floating in the empty dark between three star systems. It was the oldest neutral ground in known space, built long before humans had even left their home world. Inside its curved halls, the Galactic Council met once every cycle to settle disputes, welcome new species, and decide who would be allowed to sit at the table of the stars. Today was one of those days. Today, the Council was talking about Earth. The chamber was round, with high silver walls that glowed faintly blue, and a long table shaped like a crescent moon sat in the middle. Around it sat the delegates of the great powers of the galaxy, each one from a different star, each one certain that their people were the strongest in existence. Behind them, screens floated in the air, showing star maps, fleet numbers, and images of ships so large they could swallow moons. At the head of the table sat the council speaker, an old being named Thessaly Orn, whose skin shimmered like water under moonlight. Thessaly had seen 1,000 species rise and 100 fall. She had heard every kind of boast, every kind of threat, and every kind of promise. She folded her long fingers together and looked at the 5 delegates who had asked to speak that day. "You have all requested time before this council," Thessaly said, her voice calm and even. "The matter on the table is the human species, and whether their world should be granted full membership rights, along with a seat on the Defense Committee. Speak, and speak quickly. We have much to discuss." The first to rise was Kroth Voss, a delegate of the Vornak Empire. He was tall and scaled, with a jaw full of teeth that never quite closed, and eyes the color of dried blood. The Vornak were known across the galaxy as builders of the largest warships anyone had ever seen, floating fortresses that could crack a planet's crust if provoked. Kroth's voice was a low growl that shook the table. "Humans," he said, as if the word tasted bad in his mouth, "have been in space for less than 300 years. My people have sailed the stars for 10,000. Our battleships, the Krothari class, carry enough firepower to end a war in a single day. I have seen the reports on human ships, small, slow, weak metal skins with weapons barely strong enough to punch through a Vornak scout's shielding. Giving them a seat on the Defense Committee would be like giving a child the keys to a warship. I say no." A murmur passed through the chamber. Several delegates nodded. Next stood Zinthar, delegate of the Skarn Dominion, an insectoid being with 6 thin arms and a voice that clicked and buzzed as she spoke, translated smoothly into common speech by the small device at her throat. The Skarn were famous for their swarm tactics, sending thousands of small, fast ships into battle at once, overwhelming enemies through sheer numbers and coordination. "The Vornak speak of size," Zinthar said. "I speak of numbers. The Skarn Dominion can field 12,000 warships within a single day, drawn from hive shipyards across 40 worlds. Humans have what? A few hundred vessels total? Their entire fleet, all of it combined, would not survive one wave of our swarm. I have studied their history. They fight each other more than they fight anyone else. They are children playing with fire. I also say no." Then rose High Lord Threxus, of the Cybrid Collective, a being that was part flesh and part machine, his body humming faintly with the sound of internal engines. The Cybrid ships were legendary for one reason above all others: their armor. Cybrid battleships were said to be nearly impossible to destroy, built from a living metal that repaired itself even in the middle of battle. "I will not waste words," Threxus said, his voice flat and mechanical. "Our armor has never been pierced by any weapon known to this council. Human weapons are chemical and simple. Their best warship would bounce its shots off a Cybrid hull like rain on stone. I do not fear them. I do not respect them either. No." The fourth to speak was Ambassador Uluma of the Faith Concord, a slender, graceful being whose skin shifted color with her mood, and whose people were known not for size or numbers, but for precision. Faith ships carried weapons so accurate they could strike a single window on a passing station from 1,000 kilometers away. "The Faith Concord does not need to boast," Uluma said softly, though her words carried through the chamber like a bell. "Our ships do not miss. A single Faith cruiser could disable a human battleship's engines, weapons, and shields in 3 shots, all without killing a single crew member, if we chose mercy. Humans fire wildly, wastefully, without elegance. I do not think they are ready. No. Finally, Commander Graal of the Urkesh hegemony stood. The Urkesh were the largest beings in the room, nearly 3 meters tall, built like walking mountains, with voices that rattled the floor when they spoke. Urkesh warships were famous for one thing: raw destructive power. A single Urkesh dreadnought carried enough firepower to level a continent. I have fought in 40 wars, Graal rumbled. I have seen empires rise and turn to dust. Humans have fought only among themselves, in wars smaller than a single Urkesh border skirmish. Their biggest weapon could not scratch the paint on my ship. Let them prove themselves in 100 years. Not today, no. 5 delegates, 5 powerful species, 5 votes against Earth. Thessaly Orn turned her calm eyes toward the far end of the table, where a much smaller figure sat quietly. This was Ambassador Maria Chen, the human representative to the Galactic Council. She was not tall, she was not scaled or armored or shifting colors with her mood. She wore a simple gray uniform, with the small blue and green symbol of Earth stitched over her heart, and she had listened to every word without interrupting once. Ambassador Chen, Thessaly said. You have heard the objections. Do you wish to respond? Maria stood slowly. The chamber went quiet. Many of the delegates leaned forward, curious what a human would say after being called weak, slow, wasteful, and a child playing with fire, all within a few minutes. I've heard everything, Maria said, her voice steady. And I understand why you doubt us. We're new here. We haven't had 10,000 years to build our fleets, or 40 worlds to draw our ships from, or living metal that heals itself. Everything you've said about our history is true. We do fight among ourselves. We have made mistakes. We are young. She paused, and let the silence sit for a moment. But there's something none of you have mentioned, she continued. You've talked about size, and numbers, and armor, and accuracy, and destructive power. You've never once asked what happens when a species that fights itself for most of its history finally stops fighting itself, and starts building something together. You assume young means weak. I'd ask you to wait before assuming anything. Krath Voss let out a low, rumbling laugh. Pretty words, Ambassador, but words do not stop a warship. No, Maria agreed. They don't. Then what does Earth offer as proof? Zinthar clicked, her 6 arms folding neatly. Reports? Simulations? We have all read the intelligence files on your fleet. Nothing in them suggests you belong on the Defense Committee. Maria looked around the table, at each of the 5 delegates in turn. You've read reports on our fleet as it was 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Some of those files are 20 years old, still being passed around like they're current. I'm not going to stand here and argue numbers with you. I have a better idea. Thessaly Orn raised a hand slightly, curious. Speak plainly, Ambassador. There's a joint training exercise scheduled at the edge of the Parath system in 6 days, Maria said. Observer ships from every species on this council are already invited to watch defense drills from several member fleets. Earth has requested, and been granted, a place in that exercise. I'd invite the 5 delegates who just spoke to send their own observers. Let them watch. Let them see for themselves, instead of relying on reports that are years out of date. There was a pause. Krath's blood-red eyes narrowed. A drill proves nothing. Any fleet can look impressive against empty space and target drones. Then don't watch a drill against empty space, Maria said calmly. Watch what happens when something unexpected shows up. The chamber fell silent again. Several delegates exchanged glances. Thessaly Orn studied the human ambassador closely, sensing something behind her calm words, though she could not say exactly what. An interesting proposal, Thessaly said at last. The Council will allow observer ships from the 5 objecting delegations to attend the Parath exercise. Ambassador Chen, I trust Earth understands what is being risked here. If your fleet performs poorly in front of 5 great powers, the vote against your Defense Committee seat will not simply fail. It may end any hope of membership for a generation. I understand, Maria said. We're not afraid of being watched. Krath Voss smiled, showing all his teeth. Good, because we will be watching very closely, little ambassador, and when your small ships stumble, do not expect our sympathy. I wouldn't dream of it, Maria said, and sat back down. The session ended shortly after, and the delegates filed out of the chamber in small groups, murmuring to each other about the strange, quiet confidence of the human ambassador. Krath Voss walked beside Commander Graal, both of them shaking their heads. "She has no idea what she has agreed to," Krath said. "5 great fleets, watching her people fail. It will be the perfect proof that Earth does not belong among us." "Perhaps," Graal rumbled. "Though I noticed she did not flinch once. Not when you spoke, not when Zinthar spoke, not when any of us spoke. In 40 wars, I have learned that beings who do not flinch when threatened have usually already survived worse." Krath waved a clawed hand. "Sentiment, Commander." "Nothing more. We will see soon enough." Far above Concord Station, in a small transport ship preparing to return to Earth's embassy cruiser, Maria Chen finally allowed herself to breathe out slowly. Her aide, a young man named Diego Reyes, waited for her with a tablet in hand. "That went about as well as we expected," Diego said. 5 votes against and a challenge on the table. "It went exactly as we expected," Maria said. "Better, actually. They took the bait. You think they'll actually show up?" "Krath Voss would not miss a chance to watch us fail," Maria said, watching the stars slide past the viewport. "None of them would. Pride is the one thing every species at that table has in common." Diego glanced at his tablet. "Command wants to know if they should adjust the exercise. Bring in the newer assets ahead of schedule." Maria thought for a long moment. 6 days from now, 5 of the galaxy's great powers would send their finest observer ships to the edge of the Parath system, expecting to see a young, unproven human fleet fumble through basic drills. They expected small ships, slow ships, weapons that could barely scratch a scout's shields. They expected exactly what their old reports told them to expect. They had no idea what Earth had built in the years since those reports were written. "Tell Command to proceed as planned," Maria said quietly. "Let's give our guests something to talk about." Diego smiled and began typing the message. Outside the viewport, Earth's small embassy cruiser began its slow turn back toward the jump lanes, carrying with it a secret that 5 proud delegates were about to discover far sooner than they expected. Back on Concord Station, Ambassador Uluma of the Faith Concord lingered near the observation window long after the others had left, watching the distant lights of passing ships. Her skin, usually a calm, soft blue when she was at ease, had shifted to a thoughtful violet. She had noticed something the others had missed or chosen to ignore. Maria Chen had not argued. She had not begged or threatened or tried to convince the council with clever words. She had simply offered proof, calmly, like someone who already knew what that proof would show. In all her centuries of diplomacy, Uluma had learned one important lesson. The most dangerous beings in any negotiation were never the loudest ones. They were the quiet ones who smiled and said, "Wait and see." She turned from the window and walked slowly back toward her quarters, already deciding she would attend the Parath exercise herself, in person, rather than send an observer ship in her place. Something told her this would be worth seeing with her own eyes. Meanwhile, deep within the Vornak Empire's home fleet, Krath Voss stood on the bridge of his personal flagship, the Krathkin Dominion, staring at old intelligence files on human shipyards. Grainy images showed small vessels, barely larger than Vornak patrol boats, with simple lines and plain gray hulls. He had seen 100 young species rise with big dreams and small fleets, and he had watched most of them either join the galaxy quietly and humbly, or be crushed by their own ambition. He did not think Earth would be any different. Still, as he closed the file, a strange thought lingered in the back of his mind. The Vornak had learned long ago that the galaxy was full of surprises, and that certainty was often the last thing a fool felt before disaster. He shook the thought away. Humans were young, humans were weak. He had seen the numbers. In 6 days, he told himself, he would watch those numbers prove themselves true, and the human question would finally be settled once and for all. He had no idea how wrong he was. Far across the galaxy, in a shipyard hidden deep within the asteroid belt of Earth's home system, massive doors slowly opened along the curved side of a construction platform larger than any station the Vornak Empire had ever built. Inside, wrapped in scaffolding and support cables, sat a ship unlike anything humanity had ever created before. Its hull gleamed with dark plating. Its weapon ports sat quiet and dormant, waiting. Engineers in thick suits floated near its enormous flank, running final diagnostics, checking systems that had taken over a decade to design and build in complete secrecy. On the ship's bow, freshly painted in clean white letters, was its name, UNS Excalibur. It was Earth's first true battleship, built not from copying alien technology, but from decades of quiet human ingenuity, stubbornness, and the simple refusal to accept the idea that humanity would always be small. In 6 days, the galaxy's great powers would gather at the edge of the Parath system, expecting to see a young species stumble through basic drills. Instead, for the first time since humanity had joined the wider galaxy, they were about to see what happened when 5 proud empires underestimated a species that had spent its entire violent, complicated history learning how to survive against impossible odds. The countdown had already begun. 6 days passed quickly for some, and slowly for others. At Earth's central command station, hidden within a quiet corner of the solar system far from prying eyes, Admiral Sarah Kessler stood before a wide view screen, showing the final preparations for the Parath exercise. She was a stern woman in her 50s, with gray hair pulled back tightly, and eyes that had seen too many tense meetings to count. Beside her stood Captain Marcus Webb, the man chosen to command the UNS Excalibur on its very first mission. "Systems check complete," Webb reported, reading from a datapad. "Weapons online, shields at full capacity, engines running clean." "She's ready, Admiral." "She'd better be," Kessler said quietly. "In 6 days, 5 of the most powerful fleets in the galaxy are going to be watching us very closely. Kroth Voss especially. He's been telling anyone who will listen that this exercise will prove Earth doesn't belong at the big table." "Let him talk," Webb said. "Talk doesn't win battles." Kessler allowed herself a small, tired smile. "No, it doesn't. But confidence like his has a way of becoming dangerous, Captain. Overconfident enemies make mistakes. We should be ready in case this exercise becomes something more than a simple demonstration." Webb frowned. "You think something might happen out there?" "I think the galaxy is a dangerous place," Kessler said, "and Parath sits close to some very old, very quiet trade routes. Command has picked up strange signals in that region over the last few months. Nothing confirmed, but I want the Excalibur ready for more than just a parade drill." Webb nodded slowly. "Understood, Admiral." Far away, aboard a sleek Vornak transport ship cutting through the dark between stars, Kroth Voss reviewed the guest list for the Parath exercise with growing satisfaction. Besides his own observer team, delegations from the Skarn Dominion, the Cybrid Collective, the Faith Concord, and the Urkesh Hegemony had all confirmed their attendance. Even a handful of smaller, curious species had requested permission to watch from a safe distance. "They will all see it together," Kroth said to his aide, a younger Vornak officer named Scarix. "The great powers of the galaxy, gathered to watch Earth's little fleet stumble through its own exercise. It will be the fastest end to a membership debate this council has seen in 100 cycles." Scarix hesitated before speaking. "Sir, our scouts report the human fleet has been unusually quiet these past weeks. No test flights near their home system, no public training exercises. It is almost as if—" "As if what?" Kroth snapped. "As if they are hiding something," Scarix said carefully. Kroth waved the thought away with a clawed hand. "They are hiding their fear, nothing more. A young species preparing to embarrass itself in front of the galaxy does not exactly announce its every move. Do not read too much into silence, Scarix. Silence from a weak fleet means nothing." Scarix bowed his head, though something in his gut told him his commander was being too certain, too quickly. He had learned long ago that certainty and arrogance often walked the same path, and that path did not always end well. Aboard the Faith Concord's observation vessel, Ambassador Uluma sat quietly in her private chamber, reviewing every scrap of information her people had gathered on Earth's fleet over the years. Most of it was old, some of it contradictory, and almost none of it recent. She frowned, her skin shifting to a curious pale green. "Strange," she murmured to her assistant, a young faith analyst named Vessa. "Every report we have on Earth's military capacity is at least 3 years old. Some are closer to 7 or 8. For a species under this much scrutiny, that is unusual. Perhaps their technology has simply not changed much in that time," Vessa suggested. Perhaps, Uluma said, though she did not sound convinced. Or perhaps they have been very careful about what they let us see. She closed the file and looked out toward the stars, thinking again of Maria Chen's calm, steady voice in the council chamber. Wait and see, the ambassador had said, without saying it directly. Uluma had spent 300 years reading beings far more experienced in deception than a young human diplomat, and she had not caught even the smallest flicker of a lie in Maria's expression. That, more than anything, worried her. Meanwhile, at the edge of the Parath system, construction crews and support ships worked around the clock to prepare the observation platforms where the alien delegations would watch the exercise. Parath itself was a quiet system, home to a single yellow star, 3 rocky planets, and wide fields of asteroids left over from its formation. It had been chosen specifically because it sat near several old trade lanes, offering a realistic environment for defensive drills, while still being far enough from any inhabited world to avoid unnecessary risk. What almost no one outside of a very small group of people knew was that Parath's location had been chosen for another reason entirely. 3 months earlier, Earth's deep space monitoring stations had picked up faint, irregular signals coming from just beyond the edge of the Parath system. Signals that did not match any known species, trade route, or shipping lane. The signals were brief, scattered, and difficult to trace, but they followed a pattern that Earth's intelligence analysts recognized from old, half-forgotten records passed down by other species during early diplomatic exchanges. Pirate fleets. Specifically, a loose but dangerous alliance of raiders known across several star systems as the Ash Fleet, a scattered collection of criminals, mercenaries, and rogue military deserters who preyed on weaker colonies and unprotected trade convoys. The Ash Fleet was not large enough to challenge any of the great powers directly, but it was more than capable of overwhelming a poorly defended target, and it had a nasty habit of appearing exactly where it was least expected. Admiral Kessler had not shared this information with the other delegations. Officially, the Parath exercise was simply a defensive drill, a chance for Earth to demonstrate its capabilities to skeptical observers. Unofficially, Kessler and a small circle of Earth's military leadership suspected that the Ash Fleet might see the gathering of so many alien observer ships, all clustered together at the edge of a quiet system, as an irresistible target. If they're smart, they'll stay away, Kessler said during a private briefing with Captain Webb and a handful of senior officers. A pack of pirates isn't going to want to pick a fight with 5 great powers' warships all in one place. And if they're not smart? Webb asked. Then we'll be ready, Kessler said simply. The Excalibur stays close to the observation platforms during the entire exercise. No matter what drills we're running, she does not leave a position where she can respond quickly if something goes wrong. Understood, Admiral. Kessler studied the star map for a long moment, tracing the outline of the Parath system with one finger. There's something else. If the Ash Fleet does show up, and if we do end up needing the Excalibur to do more than just fly in formation for an audience, I want everyone to understand something clearly. We are not putting on a show for the observers. We are protecting lives, ours and theirs. If that happens to also prove a point about what Earth can do, so be it. But that is not the mission. Is that understood? The officers around the table nodded firmly. Good, Kessler said. Dismissed. As the officers filed out of the briefing room, Webb lingered behind for a moment, staring at the star map still glowing on the table. Parath looked so calm and quiet on the display, a small yellow star surrounded by drifting rock and empty space. It was hard to imagine that within days, 5 of the galaxy's great powers, along with Earth's own fleet, might find themselves standing between an unsuspecting audience and a pack of hungry pirates. He hoped, quietly, that Kessler's instincts were wrong this time. He suspected, deep down, that they were not. 2 days before the exercise, the observer fleets began arriving at the edge of the Parath system, one after another, each announcing their presence with the kind of quiet pride that only truly powerful species could afford. The Vornak arrived first, their massive Krothari-class battleship sliding into position with slow, deliberate grace, its dark hull bristling with weapon batteries. The Skarn Dominion followed soon after, their swarm carrier releasing a cloud of small support drones that spread out in a wide defensive formation, watching everything with 1,000 tiny sensors. The Cybrid Collective's vessel arrived next, its living metal hull shifting and rippling faintly under the light of Pereth's star, an unsettling reminder of just how different their technology truly was. The Faith Concorde's sleek, elegant cruiser slid into position with barely a sound, its precise engines leaving almost no trace of its passage through the void. Finally, the Urkesh hegemony's enormous dreadnought lumbered into view, so large that smaller ships instinctively gave it a wide berth, its presence alone enough to make the entire system feel just a little smaller. 5 great powers, 5 massive warships, gathered together in a single quiet system, waiting to watch a young species prove itself, or fail spectacularly in front of the entire galaxy. Aboard Earth's small observation platform, positioned at a respectful distance from the alien fleets, Maria Chen watched the arrivals with calm, careful eyes. Diego Reyes stood beside her, watching the same view with far less composure. "That's a lot of firepower gathered in one place," Diego said quietly. "It is," Maria agreed. "Doesn't that worry you? If something goes wrong out here, with all of them watching." "Something is already going to go wrong, Diego," Maria said, her voice low. "We just don't know exactly when." Diego glanced at her sharply. "You mean the Ash Fleet signals?" "I mean the Ash Fleet signals," Maria confirmed. "Kessler thinks they'll come." I agree with her. Too many valuable targets gathered in one place, all of them assuming they're perfectly safe because of who else is watching. That's exactly the kind of overconfidence pirates love to exploit. So what do we do? Maria's eyes drifted toward the distant shape of the UNS Excalibur, sitting quietly near the edge of the formation, its dark hull barely visible against the black of space. "We do exactly what we planned to do all along," she said. "We let them watch." On the bridge of his flagship, Kroth Voss studied the small human observation platform with something close to amusement. Beside it, barely visible against the darkness, sat what his sensors identified as Earth's primary warship for the exercise, a vessel roughly the size of a mid-tier Vornak cruiser, though the sensor readings were oddly inconsistent, flickering between different mass and power estimates in a way that made his engineering officer frown. "Sensor ghosting," the officer reported. "Their hull material must be interfering with our scans somehow. We're getting conflicting readings on mass, power output, even basic hull dimensions." "Poor equipment, no doubt," Kroth said dismissively, "or poor construction. Either way, it changes nothing. Begin recording. I want every second of this exercise captured for the Council record." "Yes, Commander." Similar conversations echoed aboard the Skarn, Cybrid, Faith, and Urkesh vessels, as sensor officers reported the same strange, inconsistent readings from the human battleship, and were told, in various tones of dismissive confidence, to simply begin recording and let the exercise speak for itself. None of them thought to ask why a supposedly primitive species would happen to possess hull technology capable of confusing 5 different alien sensor systems at once. As the final hours before the exercise ticked away, tension quietly built across the Parath system, though only a handful of people, all of them human, understood exactly how much was really at stake. Somewhere beyond the edge of the system's sensor range, hidden among the drifting asteroid fields of a neighboring belt, the scattered ships of the Ash Fleet gathered in the darkness, watching the bright cluster of alien warships with the patient, hungry attention of predators eyeing a herd of unsuspecting prey. Their scans, cruder and less advanced than those of the great powers, picked up exactly what the great powers' sensors had struggled to fully understand. 5 massive warships, extremely well defended, gathered together with a scattering of smaller vessels around them. Among the raiders, this only made the opportunity more tempting, not less. 5 great fleets, all watching each other, all distracted by their own rivalries and their shared amusement at a young species' expense. It was, by every measure the Ash Fleet's leadership understood, the perfect moment to strike. Aboard the Excalibur, Captain Webb stood on the bridge, watching the final countdown to the start of the exercise tick down on the main display. Around him, his crew worked quietly and efficiently, running last checks on weapons, shields, and engines, their faces calm despite the enormous audience gathered just beyond their hull. 2 minutes to exercise start, the helm officer reported. Webb nodded slowly, his eyes drifting toward the edge of the system, toward the dark, empty space, where Admiral Kessler's instincts told her something dangerous was quietly waiting. "Stay sharp, everyone," he said quietly. "I have a feeling this is going to be a very interesting day." No one on the bridge argued with him. Far beyond the edge of Pereth's sensor range, the Ash Fleet's raiding ships began, slowly and quietly, to move. The exercise began exactly on schedule, and for the first hour, it went almost exactly the way the 5 alien delegations had expected. Earth's fleet, a modest collection of cruisers, frigates, and support ships, ran through a series of basic defensive formations under the watchful eyes of the observer platforms. The ships moved competently enough, forming defensive rings, practicing coordinated turns, and simulating responses to mock attack runs from drone targets. It was solid, professional work, but nothing that impressed the seasoned military officers watching from the alien vessels. "As expected," Croth Voss said, watching the display on his bridge with the faint boredom of someone confirming exactly what he already believed. Competent for a young species, nothing more. Beside him, Scarix studied the sensor readings more carefully, his brow ridges drawn together in thought. "Commander, the larger vessel, the one they call Excalibur, it has not moved from its position near the observation platform since the exercise began. Holding in reserve, no doubt," Croth said. "Probably their flagship. They likely fear damaging it during drills in front of an audience." "Perhaps," Scarix said, though he continued watching the strange, quietly patient shape sitting near the edge of the formation, its dark hull barely visible even under close scan. Aboard the Faith Concorde's cruiser, Ambassador Uluma watched the same drills with far more attention than boredom. She had spent 3 centuries studying military strategy across a dozen different species, and something about the human formations struck her as subtly different from what she expected. "Their movements are not showing off," she murmured to Vesa. "Look at the spacing between ships. Look at how quickly they adjust when one formation shifts into another. This is not a fleet performing for an audience. This is a fleet that has drilled these exact maneuvers hundreds of times, quietly, without anyone watching." "You sound almost impressed, Ambassador," Vesa said. "I am cautious," Uluma corrected gently. "There is a difference." An hour into the exercise, the drills shifted toward simulated combat scenarios, with Earth's smaller ships practicing evasive maneuvers against holographic threat markers projected by the observation platforms. It was standard, unremarkable material, and several of the alien delegations began quietly discussing lunch arrangements and post-exercise briefings, assuming the display was winding toward its natural, uneventful conclusion. It was at that exact moment that Earth's deep space sensor net, quietly monitoring the edges of the Parath system from stations most of the alien delegations did not even know existed, detected the first unmistakable signs of incoming ships. Aboard the Excalibur, Captain Webb's console lit up with a sharp, alert tone. He straightened immediately, all traces of the calm, watchful patience from earlier replaced by focused urgency. "Report," he said sharply. "Long-range sensors picking up multiple contacts bearing 317, moving fast," the sensor officer said, her voice tight. "At least 20 ships, maybe more, emerging from the asteroid field at the edge of the system. Configuration matches known Ash Fleet raider profiles." Webb's jaw tightened. Admiral Kessler's instincts had been right. "Time to intercept the observation platforms?" he asked. "At current speed, 6 minutes, Captain." 6 minutes. Not much time, but enough, if they moved quickly and decisively. "Alert command," Webb ordered. "Alert all observer vessels immediately. Full priority channel. Incoming hostile contact. 20+ ships. 6 minutes to intercept the observation platforms." The alert went out, across every channel simultaneously, cutting through the quiet, routine chatter of the exercise like a blade. Aboard the alien vessels, confusion quickly turned to alarm as sensor officers scrambled to confirm the warning, and delegates who moments earlier had been discussing lunch found themselves suddenly staring at threat displays, showing a large, fast-moving hostile force bearing down on their position. "Confirmed," the Vornak sensor officer reported, his voice sharp with surprise. 23 unidentified vessels, moving at high speed, weapon signatures consistent with Raider-class ships. They will reach the observation platforms in approximately 5 minutes. Krath Voss stood up sharply from his command chair, his earlier boredom vanishing instantly. Ashfleet Raiders, this far from their usual hunting grounds? Impossible. Confirm the reading. Reading confirmed, Commander. They are real, and they are closing fast. Across the system, similar scenes played out aboard the Skarn, Cybrid, Faith, and Urkesh vessels, as delegations that had gathered to casually judge a young species' military drills suddenly found themselves facing the very real possibility of combat, with civilian observation platforms, including their own diplomatic staff, sitting directly in the path of an incoming hostile fleet. Options, Commander Graal barked to his bridge crew aboard the Urkesh dreadnought. How quickly can we move to defend the observation platforms? Our engines require several minutes to fully spin up from standby, Commander, his helm officer reported grimly. We were not expecting to need full combat readiness during a diplomatic exercise. The same problem echoed across nearly every alien vessel in the system. Powerful as they were, none of the 5 great fleets had expected actual combat during what was supposed to be a routine observation of a young species training drills. Weapons were on standby. Shields were at low, peaceful power settings appropriate for a diplomatic gathering. Engines idled at cruising speed, not the aggressive readiness needed to intercept a fast-moving hostile force in time. 5 of the most powerful warships in the galaxy, and not one of them was ready to move in time to protect the very observation platforms they had all gathered to use. Aboard Earth's observation platform, Maria Chen watched the threat display with grim, focused calm, while around her, staff members moved quickly and efficiently toward emergency positions, exactly as they had drilled for this exact possibility. Diego, get everyone to the shelter pods, Maria said firmly. Now. What about you? I'll be right behind you, Maria said. Go. As Diego hurried the platform staff toward the emergency shelters, Maria opened a direct channel to the Excalibur's bridge. Captain Webb, this is Ambassador Chen. Status? We have the incoming contact tracked and confirmed, Ambassador. Webb's voice came back, steady despite the tension in the background. 23 raider vessels, closing on the observation platforms. The alien fleets are still spinning up from standby. They won't reach intercept range in time. Can the Excalibur reach intercept range in time? There was a brief pause. Yes, Ambassador, we can. Maria closed her eyes for just a moment, thinking of every careful plan, every quiet year of preparation that had led to this exact moment, a moment she had hoped would never actually come, but had prepared for anyway, just in case. Then do it, Captain, she said. Protect those platforms, all of them, human and alien alike, whatever it takes. Understood, Ambassador, Webb said, and there was something in his voice, some quiet, steady confidence, that made Maria believe, for the first time since the alert had sounded, that everything might actually be all right. All hands, this is the captain. Webb's voice rang out across the Excalibur's internal comm system. We have a confirmed hostile force closing on the observation platforms, alien and human personnel both. The rest of the galaxy's fleets are not going to reach intercept range in time. That means it falls to us. Weapons free, shields to full combat power, engines to maximum thrust. Let's show them what Earth actually built. A wave of quiet, focused energy swept through the Excalibur's crew as they moved into full combat readiness, months and years of preparation clicking into place with practiced precision. The great battleship's engines roared to life, and for the first time since arriving at Parath, the UNS Excalibur began to move with its true speed and purpose, cutting through space toward the incoming raider fleet. Aboard the alien vessels, sensor officers watched in stunned confusion as the small, seemingly unremarkable human battleship suddenly surged forward at a speed that did not match any of their earlier readings, its dark hull now blazing with the unmistakable heat signature of weapons charging to full power. That is not possible, the Vornak sensor officer said, staring at his display. Their acceleration rate, it is nearly double what our earlier readings suggested was possible for a vessel of that size. Krath Voss stared at the display in silence, the first real flicker of doubt he had felt since the debate began creeping into his mind. Recalculate, he said quietly. Recalculate everything. But there was no time for recalculation. The raider fleet was closing fast. The observation platforms sat helpless and undefended in their path, and every great power gathered at Parath. For all their pride, Their ancient fleets, and their thousands of years of military tradition, found themselves in the exact same position, watching, helpless, as a single human battleship raced alone toward 23 hostile ships, the only thing standing between disaster and the safety of everyone gathered to judge it. On the bridge of the Excalibur, Captain Webb watched the raider fleet grow larger on the main display, his hands steady on the arms of his command chair. "Weapons status," he called out. "All batteries charged and ready, Captain," the weapons officer reported. "Point defense grid online. Main cannons standing by." "Shields?" "Full combat power, holding steady." Webb allowed himself one slow, steady breath, thinking of every year of training, every quiet sacrifice, every stubborn refusal to accept that Earth would always be small, that had led to this exact moment. "All right," he said quietly. "Let's go to work." The UNS Excalibur surged forward into the darkness, its weapons glowing to life along its hull, racing to meet the incoming raider fleet head-on, while 5 of the galaxy's great powers watched in stunned silence, finally beginning to understand that everything they thought they knew about Earth's fleet had been wrong. The Ash Fleet raiders had not expected resistance. That much became clear within the first 30 seconds of contact. Their scans, crude compared to the great powers' sensors but still sharp enough for their purposes, had shown 5 massive alien warships sitting quiet and unprepared, engines idling at cruising speed, weapons on standby, shields set to low, peaceful power. They had planned their attack around exactly that weakness, expecting to sweep past any slow response and strike the vulnerable observation platforms before serious resistance could organize. They had not accounted for the UNS Excalibur. The human battleship tore through the darkness at a speed that defied everything the raiders' targeting systems expected from a vessel of its size, closing the distance in a fraction of the time their attack plan had allotted. Before the lead raider ships even registered the Excalibur as a serious threat, its main cannons opened fire, streaks of blue-white energy lancing across the black of space with terrifying accuracy. The first raider ship took a direct hit along its port engine and simply came apart, a bright flash of light quickly swallowed by the vacuum. The second and third followed only seconds later, caught in a precise spread of point defense fire that shredded their forward shields before the crews inside even fully understood what was happening. Aboard the Excalibur's bridge, Captain Webb watched the tactical display with focused, quiet intensity, calling out adjustments in a calm, steady voice that betrayed none of the tension humming beneath the surface. "Concentrate fire on the lead formation," he ordered. "Don't let them scatter and regroup. Weapons officer, keep the point defense grid tight around the observation platforms. Nothing gets through." "Aye, Captain." The Excalibur moved with a grace that seemed almost impossible for a ship its size, weaving between incoming fire while its own weapons methodically dismantled the raider formation, one ship at a time. Where the raiders had expected chaos and confusion among their targets, they instead found precise, coordinated destruction, delivered by a single ship that fought like it had trained for exactly this moment 1,000 times before, because it had. Aboard the Vornak flagship, Kroth Voss watched the battle unfold with an expression that had shifted from confusion to something close to disbelief. His sensor officer read out updates, in a voice tight with barely controlled shock. 5 raider vessels destroyed, 6 more disabled and drifting. The human ship has taken minimal damage, shields holding at 92%. "That is not possible," Krath said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else on the bridge. One ship, one single ship, fighting 23 raiders alone, and winning. "Commander," Scarrick said carefully, "our own fleet has only just reached full combat readiness. We could move to assist." Krath's claws tightened on the arms of his command chair as he watched the tactical display, watched the small human battleship dance through incoming fire with a precision that no report, no old intelligence file, had ever suggested was possible. Something old and proud inside him wanted to refuse the idea of aid, to insist the Vornak fleet did not need to assist a species he had called weak only hours earlier. But he was also, above everything else, a soldier, and a soldier's first duty was to the mission, not to pride. "Move to support the human vessel," Kroth ordered, his voice tight. "Target the remaining raider ships on the flanks. Do not let them slip past and reach the observation platforms." Similar orders rang out aboard the Skarn, Cybrid, Faith, and Urkesh vessels, as the great powers' fleets, finally spun up to full combat readiness, surged forward to join the battle already being fought and largely won by the single human battleship at its center. The Skarn Dominion's swarm ships arrived first, their small, fast vessels spreading out to cut off the raiders' escape routes, forcing the surviving pirate ships into a tightening pocket of fire. The Cybrid Collective's living metal cruiser pushed through incoming fire without flinching, its self-repairing hull shrugging off hits that would have crippled a lesser ship, adding its own considerable firepower to the growing storm of destruction closing around the Ashfleet raiders. The Faith Concorde's precise cruiser began picking off individual targets with surgical accuracy, disabling engines and weapons systems with an efficiency that mirrored, in its own elegant way, the ruthless effectiveness the Excalibur had already demonstrated. And the Urkesh dreadnought, once it finally lumbered into range, added its overwhelming firepower to the battle, its massive cannons ending the fight for any raider ship unlucky enough to cross its path. Within minutes, what had begun as a desperate, one-sided defense by a single human battleship had become a coordinated, five-fleet assault that the Ashfleet raiders had no hope of surviving. The surviving pirate ships, seeing their numbers cut down from 23 to barely 6 in the span of a few short, brutal minutes, broke formation and scattered, fleeing back toward the asteroid field they had emerged from, several of them trailing smoke and debris from damaged engines. "Should we pursue?" the Excalibur's weapons officer asked. Captain Webb studied the tactical display for a long moment, watching the remaining raider ships flee toward the cover of the asteroid field. The observation platforms were safe. The mission, at its core, had already been accomplished. "Let them go," Webb said quietly. "We've done what we came to do. No need to chase them into a field full of rocks and unknown hazards. Stand down from pursuit. Focus on damage assessment and platform safety." "Aye, Captain." As the tactical situation stabilized, and the combined alien fleets began moving cautiously to secure the area and check for any remaining threats, a strange quiet settled over the Parath system, the kind of heavy, stunned silence that follows any sudden burst of violence. Aboard Earth's observation platform, Maria Chen emerged slowly from the emergency shelter, watching the drifting wreckage of raider ships scattered across the tactical display with quiet, careful relief. Diego Reyes appeared beside her a moment later, his face pale but steady. "Everyone's accounted for," he reported. "No casualties on the platform. A few minor injuries during the shelter evacuation. Nothing serious." "Good," Maria said quietly, though her eyes remained fixed on the display, on the dark, steady shape of the Excalibur holding position near the platform, its hull scarred but intact. "Ambassador," Diego said carefully, "did you know about the possibility of an attack?" Maria was quiet for a long moment before answering. "We had suspicions. Signals near the edge of the system, patterns that matched known Ashfleet activity. We couldn't confirm it, not with certainty, but we prepared for it anyway, just in case." "And you didn't tell the other delegations?" "No," Maria admitted. "We didn't." Diego frowned slightly. "Why not?" Maria finally turned to look at him, her expression tired but resolute. "Because if we'd told them, and the attack never came, they would have called it a stunt, a trick to make ourselves look important. And if we'd told them, and the attack did come, they would have scrambled their own fleets to full readiness immediately, and we never would have gotten the chance to show them exactly what our ship could do on its own, when it mattered most. That's a big risk, Ambassador." "It was," Maria agreed quietly, "but it was a risk we prepared for very carefully, for a very long time, and it paid off exactly the way we hoped it would, even if I'll admit, watching those raider ships close in on the platforms was one of the longest 6 minutes of my life." Across the system, aboard the Vornak flagship, Kroth Voss stood in silence, watching the final tactical reports scroll across his display. 6 raider ships destroyed by the Excalibur alone, before any other fleet had even reached combat readiness. Combined casualties among the great powers' fleets, minimal, thanks in large part to the aggressive, decisive action of a single human battleship that had bought precious time for everyone else to respond. "Commander," Scarrick said quietly, standing beside him, "the human ship, its acceleration, its weapons accuracy, its shield strength, None of it matches any intelligence file we possess. No, Krath said slowly. It does not. What do we tell the council? Krath was silent for a long moment, watching the drifting wreckage of the raider fleet on his display, thinking of every proud, dismissive word he had spoken only days earlier in the council chamber. Weak, slow, a child playing with fire. We tell them the truth, he said finally, his voice quieter and more thoughtful than it had been in days. We tell them exactly what we saw here today. Aboard the Faith Concord's cruiser, Ambassador Uluma watched the same reports with an expression that had shifted, slowly and steadily, from cautious curiosity to something closer to genuine respect. Her skin had settled into a deep, contemplative blue. I told you, she said quietly to Vesa. The quiet ones are always the most dangerous. You suspected this? All of it? I suspected something, Uluma corrected gently. I did not expect quite this much. A single ship, holding the line against 23 raiders, buying time for 5 entire fleets to organize themselves. That is not luck, Vesa. That is not even simply good engineering. That is a species that has spent its entire history learning how to survive against impossible odds, and has finally built something to match that hard-won experience. As the last of the debris drifted quietly through the Parath system, and damage control teams from every fleet began the careful work of assessing what had happened, a single question hung in the air across every alien vessel present, unspoken but deeply felt. If this was what Earth could do with a single battleship, quietly built and quietly tested, largely unseen by the wider galaxy until this exact moment, what exactly had humanity been building, patiently and stubbornly, this entire time? None of the 5 delegations who had arrived at Parath expecting to watch a young species stumble through basic drills had an answer to that question. But every single one of them now understood, with absolute certainty, that they very badly needed one. 10 days after the battle at Parath, the Galactic Council convened again in the same round chamber aboard Concord Station, though the mood in the room could not have been more different from the last time Earth's membership had been discussed. Thessaly Orn sat at the head of the crescent table, her calm, ancient eyes moving slowly across the gathered delegates as the session began. This council has reviewed the full reports from the Parath system, she said, including sensor logs, tactical records, and testimony from every delegation present during the incident. Before we proceed to any formal vote, I will allow the 5 delegates who previously spoke against Earth's Defense Committee membership the opportunity to address this chamber again, in light of what occurred. A quiet murmur passed through the room. Every eye turned toward Kroth Voss, Zinthar, High Lord Threxus, Ambassador Uluma, and Commander Graal, the same 5 delegates who, only days earlier, had stood before this same table and confidently declared humanity too weak, too young, and too unproven to deserve a seat among the galaxy's great powers. Krath Voss rose first, and for a long moment he said nothing at all, simply standing quietly at his place, his usual booming confidence noticeably absent. I have fought in many battles, across many years, he began finally, his voice slower and more careful than before. I have seen fleets of every size and strength. I stood in this chamber not long ago and called humanity's ships small and weak, their weapons barely capable of scratching the shields of my own vessels. He paused, glancing briefly toward the small figure of Maria Chen, seated quietly at the far end of the table. I was wrong, Krath said simply. The Excalibur held the line against 23 raider vessels alone, buying time for 5 great fleets to organize a response. It did this not through luck, but through precision, speed, and firepower that our own sensors struggled to properly measure, even as we watched it happen. I do not know what else Earth has built, quietly, while the rest of us assumed we understood their capabilities based on old, outdated reports. But I know enough now to say clearly, before this council, that the Vornak Empire withdraws its objection to Earth's Defense Committee membership. A ripple of surprise moved through the chamber. Zinthar rose next, her 6 arms folding neatly in front of her as she spoke, her usual clicking voice quieter than before. The Skarn Dominion values numbers, she said. We build our strength through coordination, through many ships working as one. What we witnessed at Parath was something different, a single vessel, fighting with the discipline and coordination we normally expect from an entire swarm, buying critical time through sheer individual capability. I do not fully understand how a species so young achieved this, but I no longer believe humanity is a child playing with fire, as I once said. The Skarn Dominion withdraws its objection. High Lord Threxus rose next, his mechanical voice as flat and measured as always, though even he seemed to choose his words with unusual care. Our armor has never been pierced by any weapon known to this council. I do not know if human weapons could pierce it either, and I confess, for the first time in a long while, that this uncertainty troubles me more than it should. What I witnessed at Parath was not simple brute force. It was precision, discipline, and courage, demonstrated by a crew willing to face impossible odds alone, rather than wait for backup that might not arrive in time. The Cybrid Collective withdraws its objection. Ambassador Uluma rose gracefully, her skin settling into a calm, thoughtful shade of blue as she addressed the chamber. I said not long ago that humans fire wildly and wastefully, without elegance. I was wrong about that as well. What I witnessed at Parath was some of the most precise, disciplined combat I have seen in 3 centuries of study. The Faith Concord has always valued accuracy above all else. It seems humanity has learned to value it too, and has combined it with something else, a kind of stubborn courage that I confess our own history does not always demonstrate as clearly. The Faith Concord withdraws its objection and offers its formal respect to the crew of the Excalibur. Finally, Commander Grawl rose, his massive frame casting a long shadow across the table as he spoke, his rumbling voice quieter and more thoughtful than it had been days earlier. I have fought in 40 wars, he said. I have seen many species rise, and many fall. I said humanity had only fought among themselves, in wars smaller than a single Urkesh border skirmish, and that they were not ready to stand among us. I still believe humanity is young, but I no longer believe young means weak. What I witnessed at Parath was a species that has clearly spent its entire difficult history learning how to survive against impossible odds, and has finally built something worthy of that hard experience. The Urkesh hegemony withdraws its objection. Thessaly Orn allowed the chamber to settle into quiet for a long moment before turning her calm gaze toward Maria Chen. Ambassador, you have heard the withdrawal of every objection raised against your species. Do you wish to address this council? Maria rose slowly, and for a moment, the entire chamber waited in silence, remembering the last time she had stood in this exact spot, calm and steady, facing 5 confident voices that had called her people weak, slow, and unready. I want to say something clearly, so there's no confusion, Maria said. We didn't go to Parath planning to prove a point through violence. We went hoping simply to demonstrate a training exercise, honestly and openly, and let the results speak for themselves. When the Ash Fleet attacked, our crew didn't fight because they wanted to impress anyone in this chamber. They fought because there were people in danger, human and alien alike, and someone needed to protect them. She paused, looking around the table at each delegate in turn. I won't stand here and pretend humanity is perfect, or that we don't still have a long, difficult road ahead of us. We do. We're young, exactly like you all said. We've made mistakes, exactly like you all said. But I hope what happened at Parath showed you something important. Young doesn't mean weak. It means we're still growing, still learning, and still capable of surprising even ourselves sometimes, when it matters most. Thessaly Orn nodded slowly, a faint, rare smile touching the corner of her ancient face. Well spoken, Ambassador. With all 5 objections formally withdrawn, this council will now proceed to a formal vote on Earth's membership to the Defense Committee. The vote, when it came only minutes later, was unanimous. For the first time since humanity had joined the wider galactic community, Earth held a seat among the great powers, not because of old alliances, or ancient history, or 10,000 years of shipbuilding tradition, but because a single crew, aboard a single ship, had chosen courage over caution when it mattered most, and had proven, in the span of a few brutal, brilliant minutes, that a young species could still stand tall among giants. News of the vote reached Earth within hours, spreading quickly across every corner of the planet, from quiet coastal towns to enormous, crowded cities. People gathered around screens in homes, schools, and public squares, watching footage from the Parath battle that had finally been cleared for public release. footage of the Excalibur weaving gracefully through incoming fire, its weapons blazing, holding the line alone against overwhelming odds until help could arrive. Aboard the Excalibur itself, now docked quietly at a repair station near Earth's home system, Captain Webb stood on the observation deck, looking out at the distant blue marble of the planet he had sworn to protect. Admiral Kessler joined him a few minutes later, a datapad tucked under one arm. "Council vote came through," she said. "Unanimous. We're officially members of the Defense Committee." Webb allowed himself a small, tired smile. "That's good news, Admiral." "It is," Kessler agreed, though her eyes remained fixed on the same distant view of Earth. "Though I imagine it's only the beginning of something much bigger. A seat on the Defense Committee means responsibility, Captain. It means the galaxy is going to be watching us very closely from now on, expecting a lot more than one lucky battle." "It wasn't luck," Webb said quietly. "No," Asler agreed, a faint smile touching her own tired face. "It wasn't." Far across the galaxy, aboard his flagship, Krath Voss stood alone in his private quarters, reviewing the tactical footage from Parath, one final time, watching the Excalibur cut through the raider formation with a precision he still found himself struggling to fully understand. Beside the footage, a new file had arrived from Earth's diplomatic office, an open invitation for a formal military exchange program between the Vornak Empire and the newly recognized Earth Defense Fleet. Krath considered the invitation for a long moment, remembering his own proud, dismissive words from only weeks earlier. Then, slowly, he reached out and accepted it. Some lessons, he thought, were worth learning properly, even if pride had to be set aside to learn them. Aboard the Faith Concord's cruiser, Ambassador Uluma watched a similar report scroll across her own private display, her skin settling into a calm, satisfied shade of gold. She had spent 3 centuries learning to recognize the quiet ones, the beings who did not need to boast because they already knew exactly what they were capable of. She suspected, as she closed the file and looked out toward the stars, that this would not be the last time the galaxy underestimated humanity, and found itself quietly, thoroughly surprised. Back on Concord Station, in the quiet hours after the council session ended, Maria Chen stood alone at the same observation window where Ambassador Uluma had once lingered, watching the distant lights of passing ships drift silently through the dark. Diego Reyes found her there a while later, 2 cups of coffee in hand. "Big day," he said, handing her one of the cups. "Big day," Maria agreed quietly. "You think this changes things? Really changes them, I mean. Not just a seat at a table." Maria considered the question for a long moment, watching the stars beyond the window, thinking of everything that had led to this exact moment. Years of quiet preparation, careful planning, and one crew's brave, decisive choice to stand and fight when it mattered most. "I think," she said slowly, "that the galaxy finally understands something important about us. We're young, we're still learning, we'll probably make plenty more mistakes along the way, but we're not going anywhere, and we're not going to stay small and quiet forever, just because that's what everyone expected of us at the start." Diego smiled, raising his coffee cup slightly in a quiet toast. "To Earth." Maria raised her own cup, a small, tired, genuine smile finally breaking through her calm, steady expression. "To Earth," she agreed, "and to everyone who's about to find out just how far we're willing to go, to prove exactly where we belong." Outside the window, among the countless distant lights of a galaxy that had spent centuries deciding what humanity was and was not capable of, the stars continued their slow, quiet turn, indifferent to empires, votes, and old assumptions, waiting patiently to see exactly what humanity would build next.